Hello again, YouTubers. Autumn with SpongeBob 101 back here again on the SpongeBob channel with our review for Kamp Koral, SpongeBob's Under Years episode 26, Hats Off to Space, and in a nutshell. The synopsis states, the Dingies travel to outer space. Also, after discovering his empty shell, Narlene and Nobby disguise themselves as Camp Master Krabs. Let's dive right in. We begin with Hats Off to Space. I must say the space exploration was a fairly unique and really fun theme overall. The episode begins with campers' hats suddenly lifting off into the atmosphere. SpongeBob is once again trying to catch his first jellyfish, only for him to be distracted by his camp hat taking off. On Patrick's end, he glued his hat to his head, and this causes him to be pulled along as well, only to be rescued by SpongeBob and Sandy, and somehow getting his tiny brain exposed. Sandy suggests that they should search for missing hats by going to outer space, and so they get strapped in for the ride and they blast off. Once in outer space, SpongeBob starts swimming around and Patrick gets cramps, reminiscent of SpongeGuard on Duty in Season 3. A shadowy spacecraft then attracts their attention and they follow it into an asteroid belt filled with space junk and then run out of gas at a dead end. The wormhole sequence was by far the most epic of this episode in my opinion, featuring throwbacks, including Squidward from SB129, Pinhead Larry Patrick, Handsome Squidward, Plankton from Algae's Always Greener, and more. Strangely, Patrick decides to go find a gas station in outer space and wanders off into the darkness. Oh yeah, and I have to mention the SpongeBob's knees knocking scene. Very funny. Then, the occupants of the mysterious spaceship is revealed to be none other than Narlene and Nobby, who decided to have some fun. Sandy explains their predicament with the missing hats, and Narlene and Nobby point to the moon as a potential location where the hats could have ended up. So upon crash landing there, SpongeBob and Sandy are introduced to another cousin of Narlene and Nobby, Hattie McDuty. It turns out he's been the one who's fishing up all the hats from under the sea on Earth to find a hat that fits him, without realizing that he should be putting the hat inside his air jug and not outside. And Sandy does point that out. He runs off to be with his beloved moon maid, while SpongeBob declares, "Hats all, folks." Nice one. They return to camp and are confronted by a skeptical group of campers led by Bubble Bass, who refuse to believe that a moon man stole their hats, only for the whole pile to be returned and dumped on them via special delivery by Narlene. So happy ending, right? Welp, no, they forgot all about Patrick. Patrick, however, didn't forget what he was doing though, and although he did get the gas, he fell right down into camp. So you know what's gonna happen, right? The mandatory epic explosion. This is really a perfect ending, literally with a bang. Plot gets 9 out of 10. Fairly simple plot with the disappearing hats, but I really like the adventures in space, and for once, Narlene and Nobby were actually really helpful. We also got lots of main series throwbacks, another focus on SpongeBob's inability to catch a jellyfish, and more. Also, Patrick with the gas, that's gonna be iconic. Animation gets 9 out of 10. I really appreciated the inclusion of various Kamp Koral buildings and items floating around in space. It added lots of color to an otherwise bland landscape. Plus, the wormhole, Patrick's cramps, Patrick's tiny brain floating around, the soliciting scene with SpongeBob's knees, and of course the Narwhal spacecraft were all super cool to see. Unique characteristics gets 8 out of 10. At this point, space isn't the latest frontier for SpongeBob, but introducing a random narwhal who doesn't think much about fishing up hats using a rod with what appears to be invisible string is super random and unique, I guess. I'd say the adventure as a whole was a really exciting one, and that is unique, for SpongeBob in space at least. Overall, Hats Off to Space gets 26 out of 30 from me. We then move over to In a Nutshell, and I thought this was a mixed bag. There were some funny parts, but the overall idea was a little mediocre, and it centers around prank day at Kamp Koral. Why the adults would even give 6 hours of time to the kids to prank them just doesn't make any sense, but, you know, it is what it is. Krabs does think he's outsmarting the campers by escaping to a lake in the woods, where he decides to leave his shell, kick back on a float, and relax on the water. Narlene and Nobby come along and find Krabs' shell, mistaking it for Krabs, and once they realize Krabs isn't in his shell, they decide to squeeze into it and play some pranks at camp. Once they arrive at camp in Krabs' shell, Perkins blows the war horn and announces the beginning of Skylarking Day, and the kids immediately have Mrs. Puff's bed moved into the lake, Karen paints black ink on the viewfinder of Plankton's spy scope, and Nurse Helga gets covered in feathers. As for Krabs, or Krabs' shell, Sandy is the first to prank the two with Flowers hiding a water hose. They run and hide in the outhouse only for the "this is fun" kid to use fireworks to blast them into the sky. And upon crashing in the campmaster cabin, SpongeBob just plays a lame prank by giving them a sandwich with 2 types of cheese instead of 3, and then Patrick comes around randomly trying to slap them with a plank, mistaking it for Plank Day. Well, it was a nice throwback to My Pretty Seahorse in Season 3. Faced with more kids wanting to prank them, they use Pearl as a shield only for her to attach a "kick me" sign on their back, leading to Talltail kicking them into the camp store's wall. They've had enough, and they decide to surrender, revealing that they were just pretending to be Krabs. There's so many ways the tables get turned here. Upon learning that Krabs has managed to evade the pranks thus far, everyone decides to punish Krabs by tricking him into thinking that Skylarking Day is over when it isn't. With 5 more minutes on the clock, everyone chases after Krabs, who once again leaves his shell in hopes of escaping. Yeah, really wild one. I would give the plot a 7 out of 10. Narlene and Nobby ending up on the receiving end of pranks was a breath of fresh air, but could you really blame Krabs for trying to hide from the campers in such a scenario? I hope they continue to feature the "this is fun" kid, though. The kid is just weird and entertaining at the same time. Animation gets 8 out of 10. I'm not a fan of seeing Krabs without his shell, but generally it was fairly nicely done. From Narlene and Nobby harassing his shell, to them getting pranked with the rocket outhouse and Pearl's betrayal. Unique characteristics gets 7 out of 10. Well, if you're a fan of silly pranks, I guess this episode is really unique. For me, the most unique parts are probably the very fact that there is even such a day for the kids to go wild at camp, plus Patrick and his plank even saying that a mix-up of the words prank and plank don't really matter. It was okay overall. In a nutshell, gets 22 out of 30 from me. So that's all for our review of these 2 episodes, guys. Let me know in the comments what you guys thought about them. Make sure to subscribe, like, and I'll see you guys in the next SpongeBob video coming real soon. Till then, bye!